If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. Hi there. Today I want to do a post about philosophy and some of the basic mindsets around do busy right. I think it's important as we build community to have some common terminology and to at least understand some of the theoretical, if you will, or philosophical underpinnings of all this. And when we understand these basics, then we have a similar mindset when we're looking at these things. And I think that's good for a community. We'll get to the fundamental principles, but I want to start out with a client story. And the client's name is Kellie. We were talking about attention compass, and she said, well, I don't know anything about all that, but I do admire the Larry Zen. And I loved it when she said that. I didn't know what Larry Zen meant, other than, of course, Zen, Z-E-N, as in Eastern philosophy, which confused me a little bit for reasons that I'll get into. So I said, what do you mean, Larry Zen? And she said, nothing seems to bother you much. Nothing seems to get under your skin. You don't get ruffled very easily. You seem to be able to take things on and accomplish things without getting too wrapped up in the drama and the angst of the situations. I will say I consider that a high compliment, and that's very much how I want to live my life and how I want to be perceived. I'll have a quote on that later. I have two kind of perspectives that I get from people sometimes. A lot of people think that I'm this go-go 110% productivity guy. I'm not. Other people sometimes think I come off like Spock in Star Trek, that I'm not emotional. Well, I don't try to not have emotions. I'm actually a fairly emotional person. I'm just not very demonstrative about that. As an example, I'm a football fan. I live in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I'm a football fan. You don't usually see me screaming at the TV. I'm very much a Monday morning quarterback, just like everybody else. And I have thoughts about what happened. And I'm very interested in coaching and performance. I like to study really good coaches because they get results through other people. And I think that's the essence and the art of management. So all this is important to me from really several different ways. I just don't do a whole lot of drama. And part of the reason for that is because I think our feelings often get in the way of our thinking, and I'll have some examples about how that works in our lives. But by the same token, I don't want to be a hustle guy. I don't want to be a up all night 110%er. I think there's plenty of hours in the day to do what we need in order to get things done. But I believe we've got to think it through. Back to the client story. Kellie said, okay, well, how do you do that? How do you do the Larry Zen? And I said, well, a big part of it is my attention compass. I don't have stress over the things I have to do. I don't have stress over forgetting things. I don't have stress over losing track of my commitments. And that's when she said, oh, okay, well, I need some of that. And let's start studying attention compass. Now, if you're familiar with the podcast, then you know that attention compass is my system for managing my attention and tasks. I developed the system because I had these very principles in mind, this calm productivity, although I didn't use the term Larry Zen, but I think it's really neat coming from Kellie. In fact, Zen is kind of a long way away from where I actually live because, in fact, I'm a Christian. But that does have some influence. That means I think there's a plan. And that gives me a tremendous measure of calm and peace. And I think it's an important foundation of what I do. Now, hear me carefully. I don't think you have to be a Christian in order to do busy right. But I do think you have to be a Christian in order to understand the world. For example, I've studied some philosophy, and most of it makes no sense to me because they're all asking why we're here. And I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on why we're here, and most of that is expressed in the Bible. If you're curious, read one of the first 4 books of the New Testament, and you'll see where I am. And we can get into that if you'd like to. I'm happy to talk about that. Just reach out. I'm not going to have a public conversation about it, but I'd love to have a conversation. Okay, Larry, what's the big deal? You're a Christian. That's pertinent to the discussion because of a mindset. In the Bible, Jesus says, "Follow me." He says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I, for one, take that literally. I think we can have comfort and confidence knowing that it all comes out okay in the end. And that's really what a big chunk of Christian theology is all about. It all comes out all right in the end. And that's just basically being in line with the universe we inhabit and with our Creator. So I wanted to bring that out. Christianity is a core piece of my personal philosophy. And I say that not to evangelize you, but just to say that I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to try to achieve that peace and calmness that we're told we can have. If I wasn't told I could have it, then it would be harder to continue to work for it. Because, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, I don't think the world leads us in these directions. What I mean by that is, I think that we individually can deflect or defeat that promise of easy yoke, light burden. I think we can set ourselves up for uncertainty and stress and drama. And I do think that the culture is aimed at getting us away from that peace and calmness. Another reason I wanted to mention my faith is because I have a quote that's very important to me. And it's interesting because this quote is not biblical. So it's not on that same level of authority. So I didn't want to claim this quote and not let you understand what my background is and where I come to this quote. So it's not biblical. It doesn't carry the same authority or weight as it would if it were in the Bible, but I think it's a similar thought. And it's from a guy named L.P. Jacks. And Jacks was a Unitarian minister in England in the World War I and World War II eras. He actually did most of his writing in between the two wars. And I picked this quote up somewhere in my reading and I've held on to it ever since. And we're talking 15, 18 years now. So here's the quote. "A master in the art of living draws no sharp distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his education and his recreation. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence through whatever he's doing and leaves others to determine whether he is working or playing. To himself, he always seems to be doing both." And I really like that quote because it's a very good mental picture for me, a very good description of the life that I desire for myself and for people around me. And a lot of that desire, and as I said, a lot of the support for that mindset comes from my Christian philosophy. And then the implementation of that comes from my relationship as a Christian, but also from the tooling and the system that I've put in place. As an example of the thinking here, if you want to get back to kind of academic philosophy, I'm something of a minimalist and I'm something of a stoic. And I admire both of these approaches, and I think they're somewhat intertwined. neither one of them really is concerned about why are we here as much as it is about how then do we live. I'm not a hardcore minimalist. I am pretty careful about what I bring into my life, but it's not, I don't live an austere life. I'm not a monk. And in similar ways, I don't practice stoicism in the ways that Marcus Aurelius describes. I'm not going to spend 2 weeks living under a bridge to convince myself it won't kill me. And that's a lot of stoic practice. For me, it's more of a mental picture of life. It's an attitude of acceptance and, to a great degree, a lack of worry and concern about those kinds of things. I'm not great at it. I'm far, far from perfect, and I'm not even, really, really good at it. And sometimes I get concerned about possessions and material things and the size of my bank account. But then I get up and dust myself off and try again. And I've mentioned this on a couple of occasions. I will say another thing that I get out of the Bible is the Apostle Paul makes a disclaimer about being a coach. And if you're interested, the book of Philippians, chapter 3, verse 12 is the reference. And he says, not that I've already attained, but I strive towards the goal. And that's where I am. I'm not there yet, but I am moving along that path and I'm trying. And I want you to know how I've made the progress that I have. I think that the tooling and the philosophy work together to create a space where I can implement a life that meets, first and foremost, Jesus's promise, but also the Jack's quote. I think if you have the philosophy without the tooling, then your implementation is not where it needs to be. And I think if you have the tooling without the philosophy, then you wander away from the purpose, which is living a virtuous life. Now, I say peace, calm, I say easy yoke and light burden. But don't get me wrong, I'm no Pollyanna. I understand the challenges of life, and I understand there are many things that are tragic that happen in life. I'll tell you my age. I'm something of a Jimmy Buffett fan, and he did a song called He Went to Paris. And if you're not familiar with it, one of his characters in the song says, some of it's magic and some of it's tragic, but I've had a good life along the way. And I think that's true. I think that's part of this larger philosophy. And I understand and believe that tragic comes and tragic can happen to any of us and maybe will happen to all of us at one or more points in our lives. But I don't think it needs to define us. Back to the culture, and I'm talking about the Western, particularly American culture. I think it pushes us away from all of those things. I think it pushes us away from Christianity. I think it pushes us away from Stoicism, and I think it pushes us away from minimalism. Regarding Stoicism, the culture pushes us towards our feelings. And the culture talks about how we need to get in touch with our feelings and be very introspective about how we feel about things. I don't think that's a great idea for several reasons, and some of them are Christian and some of them are otherwise. In my own life, I find that if I focus too much on my feelings, then I can get captured by that. And my feelings are just as temperamental as anybody else's. And I'll give an example. It's pretty easy to let trying to express your feelings push you into hyperbole. In trying to express your feelings, you tend to use grandiose, overblown terminology. Oh, I hate this ice cream, my daughter says. Well, I mean, what do you mean? Who hates ice cream? Right? I mean, it's not like it's made out of, I don't know, dirt. Some's better, some's worse, but it's all pretty good. But I think as we get in touch with our feelings too much, as we let our feelings override us, we again get extravagant with our words. And I think that's a self-reinforcing cycle. I think the culture pushes us away from stoicism and away from controlling our feelings and our impulses. And I think some control over that is very useful. And I'll say, I I think it's okay to be introspective about feelings and a little bit of, well, why am I having this feeling? But I think that has to be tempered with recognizing that it's just an internal mental state and it doesn't necessarily define anything about the world. I think most people are about as happy as they choose to be. And I think there's lots of good thought and lots of wisdom around getting up on the right side of the bed and having a positive outlook, particularly as compared to having a negative outlook. In a newsletter, Alex Hormozy said, if I can be in a bad mood for no reason, then I can be in a good mood for no reason. And I agree with that. And I think a lot of it is mindset. And if we have the mindset of enjoying life, then I think that leads us into a good mood and it leads us into a happy, optimistic outlook. Again, that does not mean I don't care. I care a lot. I care very deeply. It just means that I choose to try to find the positive in the things that I face in the world. In some things, there's very little positive to find. And in those cases, you weep with those who weep and you comfort them and you hug them and you just share their thoughts. But I'll say we also make a whole lot of our own drama in cases where it's not indicated or necessary. We make up a whole lot of our own mental framework. And so I try to just achieve some balance there. And that's where I get with this idea of stoicism. My feelings about the task don't really matter. I either do it or I don't. But I want my decision to be based on better reasoning than my feelings about the task. And again, balance here. My work is not dodging landmines and bullets and jumping into foxholes. I don't have to go into burning buildings. I don't have to perform brain surgery. Well, at least I can take advantage of that. The worst mistake I can make in my business won't kill anybody. And I admire people that are in those roles. I admire first responders and medical professors and folks that serve in the military. And I thank you all for what you do, but I don't do that. Now, if you're thinking, great, Larry, you made a cushy life for yourself and now you can be happy about it. Well, that's not it exactly either. I'm not a wealthy guy in terms of my bank account. I don't have lots of glorious possessions and expensive cars and things. On the other hand, I've been married to my beautiful wife for 32 years. I have two children who I love deeply, and they appear to be moving along a path of becoming reasonable adults. I have lots of friends. My parents are still alive at the age of 80 plus. There have been a few tragedies. I got diagnosed with cancer for a while and that got fixed, and that's great. My wife and I, and I've mentioned this before, battled infertility. I've gotten fired from jobs, and all these things are true, and they're tragic. On the flip side of tragic, as I'm recording this, I've got a buddy who's about 40 years old, and his wife died 4 or 5 days ago. And she had a 1.5 year long battle with cancer. It was very aggressive. He's got a 14-year-old daughter. I got another buddy whose wife got addicted to drugs, and that led to divorce and separation. And for almost a decade now, he's been a single dad raising a son and a daughter that are just now becoming teenagers. I understand that there's tragedy in the world, but I think we have to work hard not to let that tragedy define us. And I want you to see that as being a hopeful outlook rather than a heartless outlook or anything like that. I just think we should work to do busy right. I think we should try to get better at our busy. And that means I use phrases and thought patterns like some of the ones that we've talked about, like calm and focused productivity. Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem called If, and you may be familiar with it, if for no other reason because it's the one that ends, and you'll be a man, my son. So you may have heard that. And the phrase here, and it's a long poem, but the phrasing here is, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, then you'll be a man, my son. And he doesn't say it, but, and you will lead a victorious life. I think that's important. Again, I think this is good advice, and I think it's a good mindset to have. And I think we can work towards doing that. So I talk about do busy right, and I talk about calm, focused productivity, because I think stress is a fundamental problem for us, both in the culture as we perceive it, and particularly as it relates to getting our work done. And it's interesting because as we move towards more knowledge work, we utilize our brains more consistently. And I'll make a point here. But in the meantime, I certainly don't mean that manual productivity folks don't use their brains. But in knowledge work, your brain, as far as we know, is your fundamental productive asset. And the particular part of your brain that you need to be able to use is the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part, in order to do what it is we do as knowledge workers and to produce value for the world. I think if we're not calm, then it fires up different parts of our brain that I refer to as the reptile brain or the monkey brain, as compared to our prefrontal cortex. And those other parts of the brain really can take over. And you probably know what I'm talking about. When you get scared, you don't do your best thinking. My wife and I use the roller coaster analogy. And by that, I mean, I want to live my life like the people on the roller coaster that have their hands up in the air, and not like the people on the roller coaster who have a death grip on the bar. Another perspective on this, David Allen used to use the phrase mind like water, and he would have understood the Zen model. He was very, very much involved in Eastern philosophy, at least based on what I've read from it. But when he says mind like water, he means if you have this pool of water and you throw a little rock into it, it reacts in little ways. And then it returns to its normal state. If you throw a big boulder into it, it reacts to a big boulder. But again, it returns back to its normal, placid, I'll say, state. When I say placid, I don't mean numb. I just mean calm, open. Everything's going to be okay. That was a big deal. I gave it big energy, and now I'm back. And everything's going to be okay. Now, back to something I talked about a minute ago. The culture wants us to be very engaged in our feelings. And I think there are reasons for that. When I say very engaged in our feelings, the culture wants us to constantly ruminate on what are our feelings and constantly be aware of the bad things that have happened in our lives and constantly just be, considering these ideas. And again, there are reasons for that. People that are engaged in their feelings make really good customers for stuff. People that are engaged in their feelings are really easy to manipulate. I think that's just true about human beings. I don't think it's some failing on anybody's part. But I also think that we can work against that. And I think if we focus too much on our feelings, then we become easy targets for things that may not be good for us. And I think the culture has moved in the direction of taking advantage of that. I look at my work and I look at most people's work, most other people's work, and there's not much about it, about what we do, that really needs to be hated. So I've used a story about a person that I met and got into a little bit of a coaching session with, just off the cuff. Coach got a coach, right? And she was saying, well, how do you go about doing the things you just hate doing? And I said, well, I don't do much that I hate doing. I just do the things that need done. And so I asked, I said, what are you doing that you hate? And she said, well, for example, I hate doing expense reports. And I said, well, what do you do for a living? And she said, I'm a bookkeeper. So I jumped in. Sorry. I said, well, wait a minute. What's the difference between your normal work, which you don't hate, and doing expense reports, which you do hate? In both cases, you're sitting in a comfortable chair with a beverage at your fingertips in a comfortable room. You're typing and looking at a screen and manipulating a mouse. What difference does it make whether it's manipulating numbers on a screen for an expense report or manipulating numbers on a screen to calculate profit and loss? I'll say I think we get locked up in that. I think we decide that we don't like something. And then our brain, when we do it, our brain says, well, I hated it. And that's a self-reinforcing loop. I did a podcast about this, but I think that stress is created from negative feelings. I think if we go into something believing that we're going to hate it or despise it or it's going to be miserable, then that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that the stress that's created from those negative feelings interferes with our ability to use our number one productive asset. And again, that's our prefrontal cortex. Stress dumps cortisol and adrenaline into our bodies, and it lights up the reptile brain, and that is not the smart part of your skull. So I just think we want to be careful doing that, and that's back to this positive mindset. We can work to do busy right. We can work on mindsets and on techniques. And I try to teach that. Now, I like to coin terms. I'm a guy that's fascinated by words and language. All of my StrengthsFinder and personality reports will tell you that. And one of the terms that I like and use is work play. I choose to do work because I enjoy work. And this is back to the Jack's quote. I want it to be very difficult for you to tell if I'm working or playing because I don't distinguish very often. And I've said this a bunch of times. So the definition of work, the things we do to turn ourselves and our environment into what we want them to be. And I think a lot of the difference between what we call work and what we call play is really in our own heads. Back to the Jack's quote, I just don't think that we need to have a whole lot of angst about doing work, about changing our environment. Some things we do because we want to have a nice bank account. Other things we do because we want the dog not to make a mess in the house. It's just work and play and work play. I like to be cheerful and lighthearted and relaxed and playful, whether I'm working for money or working to charm my beloved wife. I don't believe it should be this hard labor, this straining sweat popping out of your forehead situation. That's what I mean when I say work play. I use another term that's very similar, work life. And that's back to the notion, to the definition of work. It's just what we do. We're critters that are constantly trying to change the world around us and trying to change ourselves. Almost everything we do, just to pick an example, if you fish, you're trying to accomplish something in your own life and or in the world. You're either trying to eat, or you're trying to improve your skill, or you're trying to relax. You're trying to change something about the world or yourself. You're trying to get fish from down underneath the water out to the top of the water. And I think that's cool because of the way you have to do it. And a lot of people enjoy it and they're relaxed about it. So how is our work really different from that? Trying to make things happen in the world. And I've run into this straining, sweat popping out of your forehead thing from time to time, particularly around playing the electric bass. Sometimes it goes better and sometimes it goes worse. And I come home and I go, wow, I had a tough morning at the gig today. And my gig is every other Sunday morning. I get on stage and play bass at my church. We have a good time. It's a rock and roll church. Come visit me. And I come home and I say, wow, today was a little tough. Things weren't working right for me. And somebody will say, well, quit whining. You do it because you love it. Yeah, loving it doesn't remove the hard part of it. Loving it means I do more boring scales and more repetitive practice. Loving it means I get up at 5:30 on Sunday mornings when, based on traffic patterns, the rest of the world is sleeping in. And I go to my gig and I try to do that with an I get to attitude. Hey, I get to do this. I worked hard to put myself in the situation where I can do this. I'll give you another example that doesn't have much to do with church. There's a Billie Jean King quote, and it's on a plaque at the US Open tennis tournament. And it says, quote, pressure is a privilege. And what she means by that, she talks to tennis players and she says, you've dreamed your whole life of being in the US Open final, and you worked hard to get here. Now you're here. So why all of a sudden is the pressure something that's difficult for you to handle? In your own life, you worked hard to get to the point where you could make a sales presentation. In the room, your adrenaline's up a little bit, but does that mean it has to be a negative experience? With the bass, I worked hard for a year and a half to get to a level of comfort so that I could do it publicly. Why now is that some big pressure-packed deal? Why is the pressure such a problem? And so I like to take a more lighthearted, relaxed, playful workload. Yes, we have deadlines. Some are easy to hit, some aren't easy to hit. Sometimes we're a little tired, but we're always within a couple of hours of a bed. And work life, I think we should merge it all together and then we can be happy about it. And it's really one thing. What if we could do work play life and have this lighthearted and relaxed and playful attitude about what we're doing? I think that's a great way to live. And then, of course, do busy right is the management of our stuff in such a way that our stuff doesn't throw us stress, that it doesn't throw us off of our work play. It doesn't throw us off of our work play life. And it works like this. If I'm constantly worried about forgetting things and I'm constantly worried about not meeting commitments and I'm constantly trying to stress my brain into shape around what I need to do, that's not playful. I will say if our tools get in our way, then I'm actually pretty good at spending a little time to fix the tools. Now, I talked about being a minimalist, and I try to choose a contentment perspective on minimalism, thinking about how much stuff do I need? I believe excess stuff causes problems, more problems than it solves. My wife and I have 2 dogs. I like the dogs, but they're a pain in the butt sometimes. They cause emotional distress in my world once in a while. So I'm happy to have them, but I recognize there's a cost of having them. And that's just an example of the fact that all of our stuff breeds responsibility. I've got a neighbor that's got a nice ski boat. He parks in the driveway with a cover on it. And my dad and my family had a boat when I was a kid, and we had a great time on the boat, but it was a pain. There's a lot of things you got to do to keep a boat in shape so it behaves like a boat, and it's expensive. Upkeep is expensive on our stuff. About possessions, I try to think of taking care of a possession as actually enjoying the possession. And there's an old phrase that I ran across not too long ago. It's, if you can't afford the vet, you can't afford the pet. And all I'm saying is we need to recognize that in advance. And this leads back into this quasi minimalist lifestyle. It doesn't mean it should be a mechanical calculation. There's no profit and loss statement on having dogs in your world. But we do have to go into it with open eyes and thinking through it. So that's my perspective on minimalism. To have the things I enjoy using, and I use them so that they don't sit around and become a maintenance problem. And to recognize that if I acquire something, it's likely going to need some maintenance. And recognize that the cost of something is not just what you pay for it. The cost of something is maintenance, upkeep, and use as well. Again, I'm not some hyper rational guy. I just want to be aware of these things. So that's where minimalism creeps into this mindset. Another thing, I'm in favor of good stewardship. I think we need to be good stewards of our time and our talents. And that has a Christian slant to it because of the use of the word steward. It just means I think we're accountable for the things that we've been given and that we use them well and properly. That's what I mean by stewardship. I consistently think, am I a good manager of my things? As an example, am I a good dog owner? And my thinking is as follows. I chose to be a dog owner. Nobody put a gun to my head and nobody abandoned puppies on my doorstep. So I made that choice. So I owe it to myself to be good at it and to take care of them well. Thinking about contentment, thinking about perspective in the world. So I've got a podcast to do. It's on my mind. And the title of the podcast is, Can We Afford to Be Content? And I think that's the way we look at it in the West. We say, well, once my bank account gets to this point, then I can afford to be content. And I just think that's the wrong end of the telescope. I think we should work on contentment first. We've got a lot of received wisdom on this. There's a Charles Dickens character, and I don't remember which book it's in, but the character talks, and you'll probably recognize the quote when I say it. The quote says as follows: annual income, 20 pounds. Annual expenditure, 19, 19, and 6. Result, happiness. Annual income, 20 pounds. Annual expenditure, 20 pounds, ought and 6. Result, misery. Now let me translate that to the American monetary system. Annual income, 50 grand. Annual expenditure, 49,500. Result, happiness. On the other hand, annual income, $50,000. Annual expenditure, $50,200. Result, misery. So this contentment perspective on minimalism, that's important in my world. It feeds back into life because it removes a lot of the drama from our lives. Having debt is drama. Overspending our limits is drama. On the other hand, buying hamburger twice a week and steak once a week is not much drama. I like hamburger. I do think that the culture is very much aimed against this. And that's just the culture being what the culture is. It's a consumerist culture. It's a capitalist culture. It's a marketing-based culture that largely runs on money. And it's done us a lot of good in a lot of ways. But it's also misdirected folks in their thought patterns and lifestyles. Now, to work all this together, I think we can improve the lives of knowledge workers. I think as knowledge workers, we can improve our own lives. And I hope I'm inviting you to become part of a community where we can help each other and help other knowledge workers improve their lives. And I think it's important to think a little bit about actually working to improve our knowledge work. The technological culture, in my mind, just makes us faster all the time. Our tools have made us faster, but our tools haven't really changed the way we do things. And I did a whole episode on this. A document is still a document, whether it's electronic or a piece of paper. We haven't changed that very much at all in 100 years. We've removed the need for manual or even electric typewriters, but we still have keyboards. And keyboards are a technology that's on the order of 150 years old. Oh, our technology is leaps and bounds making us better. Well, maybe not, because I think a clerk from the turn of the 19th century would be right at home on a computer keyboard. You'd have to get them over being freaked out about the screen and electricity and all that sort of thing. But they would completely understand the keyboard, and it's pretty likely they could out-type you. So in a lot of ways, our technology hasn't fundamentally changed the way we do, but it has sped us up. It's made us faster. For these reasons, I worry about our productivity as knowledge workers. And I want us to think about that. I want to help us think about that. How can we be more productive as knowledge workers instead of just faster? And that's the point of what we're trying to do here with Attention Compass and Do Busy Right. I will say there's a few things out there in the culture that bug me and a few things I don't love. And I've alluded to most of them. One is faster, but not better. So we go faster and faster and faster. We're humans. We have a pace. We're not meant to be overclocked. If you don't know what overclocked is, it's a computing term where you actually speed up the clock in the computer. You make it go faster, and everything else goes a little bit faster as well. But it causes problems as well, particularly around energy consumption and the production of heat inside the computer. And you can really ruin a computer with overclocking. Now, is that what we want to do with ourselves? Is that what the culture is doing, pushing us? I'm against the hustle culture. I'm against this notion that I got to give 110%. I don't have 110%. I'm sorry, but that's a dumb statement. I'm going to give 110%. I got to do what I can do. And I can't do a whole lot more than that. Now, I don't consider myself a lazy human being, and I think most people who know me don't consider me lazy. But I'm also not running around beating my chest about pulling all-nighters and 90-hour work weeks. Now, I've done a few of those in my life, in my younger days. In the programming world, that happened. It may still happen. But it's certainly not something to be proud of. Look at it from a different perspective. Well, are you not any better at your job than that? But I do think the culture pushes us in the 110% direction. Now, there's a close cousin to this mindset, and I refer to it as hyper-reactivity. And that's a place where our mental image is that if we don't take the phone call right now, it's going to be a tragedy. Well, let's think about that. Is that true? Can they not leave a voicemail? Are we that important in their lives that they need to hear from us in 30 seconds? Or is that some mental image that we've created for ourselves? Haste makes waste used to be a phrase. Haste makes waste. I haven't heard it in a long time. But that's the downside of this overclocking, this cultural hustle thing that we try to do. It pushes us towards hyperreactivity. I don't think it's necessary, and I certainly don't think it's good for us, and it's not good for our work. So we've talked about a lot of things. We talked a little bit about minimalism and contentment. I'm against the kind of consumerism is image-driven consumerism. You're not a better person because you own more stuff. In case nobody ever told you that, I'm telling it to you now. So I think we need to find a way to measure success, sure. But remembering that the main reason to measure success is so that we can understand where we need to get better. And it's not so that we can get to some state where we can beat on our chest and say, successful enough. I think most people view me as consistent and pretty well motivated. I don't shirk a lot of things, but that doesn't mean hustle culture. It just means persistence. And it means when it's time to work on something and to practice getting better at something, that we're happy to do that. And we don't treat it as some sort of tragedy in our lives. I definitely don't love that consumerism, that discontented nature of things that marketing pushes on us to overclock our lives. Another thing, while I'm on the tirade, if you heard more than 3 episodes of this podcast, you know this. I'm definitely against multitasking. We're just not capable of it. And I've said before, the term didn't even exist until the computer scientists started thinking about it when applying it to the machines. And then because of that, we invented this idea that human beings could do it. And we can't. Computers don't even do it. And it's really technical. I won't get into it. But computers are good at task switching, and they can do things in ways that humans can't. And so I think we need to be considerate of our stuff and considerate of our customers and considerate of our results and stop doing multitasking. Now, we've talked about a lot of stuff here, and I think it's important for us so that we can understand where we're at as a community, where we have common ground. And I want to have a community, and I want us to be like-minded so that we understand all these sort of things and we're working together towards a common set of goals. So since it's so much stuff, I'll recap for you. If you agree with the things that I'm about to recap, then start making noise about it. Reach out to me, talk about it on LinkedIn. Let's have some chatter about it. Let's help other people understand where we're at and what we're thinking and where we're going. And then that'll help them move in this direction of calm, focused productivity toward work play and work life and work play life. So I hope these are things that speak to you and speak to your heart. Yeah, it's not a plea to your emotions as much as it is a plea to your vision, and for you to have the vision that this is doable. And that's why I love to talk about it. If you think I'm full of it, tell me. Shoot me something. I'd love to talk with you about that, hear a different perspective. But I think a lot of people just assume that this present way is somehow the way it has to be. Now, I'm enough of an engineering type guy that I'll fiddle with it and experiment with it until it gets closer to behaving in the ways that I want it to. And that's why I develop systems and develop mindsets. I'm very excited to mention that we will have a group online class led by me to implement Attention Compass. The class will start, I'm not sure when you'll hear this, but the class will start October 29th of 2024. So in about 10 days from publishing here. If that's something that you're interested in, I'd really love for you to reach out. It may be an opportunity for you to really put tooling around some of the mindsets that we've talked about here today. You can reach me on LinkedIn, or as usual, you can email me directly, Larry@DoBusyRight. I will say, if you reach out on LinkedIn, please do mention the podcast so I'll know the context that the connection is coming from. So if that's something you want to do, starts in a week, we'll go 8 weeks, 1 hour a week, and I'll teach you how to do the tooling that really implements all the mindset things we're talking about here. A way to actually put boots to your notion of do busy right. And I want you to understand and pick up some motivation from this and think about what the goal is. What's the goal of doing busy right? I think it's these mindsets. And I think they're good mindsets for us to have and pursue. So we talked a good bit about a handful of things. We talked about some philosophy. We talked about some Christianity. We talked about the master of the art of living, which is one of my favorite quotes. We talked some about minimalism and stoicism. And honestly, I take a very light version of both in my philosophy. And I'm not saying you have to share my philosophy. I'm just offering it to you as something you may want to explore. Some ideas: reasonable minimalism, not hauling off and being terribly impressed by what other people have or what they let themselves do, vacations and all that. Not being terribly impressed by what's going on social media. Maybe there's a little stoicism that could be useful, trying to recognize that what our feelings are good for and to what degree my feelings should drive my behavior. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what that is. Do busy right. Calm, focused productivity. We want to keep our heads. We want to use our prefrontal cortex rather than our reptile brain. And we want to set up systems and set up our world such that we can think through those things. Living off of motivation, living off of the things I enjoy, rather than living off of the things that I hate and forcing myself to live off of adrenaline. And I think if we're doing busy right, if we're eliminating waste and we're continually staying active, then I think we can do all that well. Now, there's a few terms that I like and use. We talked about work play and work life and work play life. I think that's fun. I think it's a lighthearted and playful way to get through the world. And I hope the tool set helps us acquire that mindset. We talked a little bit about minimalism and contentment and stewardship, the importance of stewardship, making good use of what you have, particularly as it relates to our attention. So be a good steward of your attention. I'm trying to improve the lives of knowledge workers and improve their productivity, in part because Peter Drucker said that the huge productivity we've gained, the huge prosperity that we have, and the lifestyle differences that we've gained over the last 100 years is largely based on the improved productivity of manual work. Well, Drucker's been dead for a while now, but some of the perhaps present stagnation in our economy might have to do with the fact that we're not improving the productivity of knowledge work. And I talked about this as part of our IT, as part of the productivity paradox a few episodes ago. So we've shifted from primary physical kind of factory work over into knowledge work. And the productivity of our knowledge work is pretty flat. If you're an economist, the GDP is not increasing over time. And that means that we're not producing this more value in the world. So it's harder for us to get a share of that value. And I firmly believe that. And I've studied just enough economics to know that I don't want to know any more about it. But I do think there's a lot there. I said this before, I don't like to be known for what I hate, but there's a few things that I think are pushed on us that we just need to not be engaged in. The hustle culture, I don't think you can overclock a human being. I think we have certain boundaries, and I don't think you can push us beyond that without harming us. Now, can we grow those boundaries? Yes, we can. We stretch them and we exercise them. But that happens fairly slowly. I don't think the 110% notion in the hustle culture, I don't think the 110% notion is the way to go. And I certainly don't think work has to be hard in order to be virtuous. I talked about consumerism. Don't love it, particularly the way that it's driven at us through our own discontent. Definitely against multitasking. I bang this drum all the time. I think it's harmful. I think it's, quite frankly, dumb. And I'm confident that we can't do it. I think it breeds mistakes. I've seen it enough different times. I'm sensitized to it. I've talked about it 100 times and you're getting tired of it. This is 101. So, and again, I did open with some conversation about Christianity. That's something that's critically important to me, but I know it's a hot button issue for a lot of people. But I think it's right. And I think I can demonstrate that it's right. But I can't do that in a monologue. It takes dialogue. So if that part interests you, if you want to talk more about it, I'm happy to do that. Just reach out. So in conclusion, I just wanted to let you know that this is where I want our community to go. And if you can get on board with some of these things, you think they're important, let's get together and start doing it. And we'll support each other and we'll encourage each other and we'll teach and learn from each other in a few areas. I think that'll be amazingly useful as we go through the rest of our career and the rest of our lives. Let's get out there. Let's do busy right. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the Attention Compass process. Attention Compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusyright.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do busy right.